Hello, Sarah. I commend you on finally deducing the truth. My clever ruse of implying demonic and were-creature origin worked for a time, but you have found me out. I am, in fact, a wizard. I also applaud your discovery of the counter-charm to the hypnotic influences of the Corsair's tale.
But then the behemoth came, sealing the path before it took aim. By conflict born there be the same, we'll take our leave and fly.
But in revealing my true form, you have forced my hand. For this little contest, we have kept our most powerful tools under lock and key, but no longer. Now it is time for the most powerful of incantations, a spell beyond all others. Now, a reading. Yes, that's right. Here and now, for the first time ever in a public forum, a reading from Conflict Born, Book 1 of the Endless Sky series. Chapter 1. The Skyraker's hull groaned in familiar agony as it made the transition from path to aisle. Ellie held onto the arms of her chair as the ship shuddered, and the Asgurt jerked from the strange sense of stillness back into motion. Beside her, Sid and Hawks half fell, half leapt from their seats to their posts. Sid called through the copper tubes to the different parts of the ship to ensure everything made the transition intact, and Hawks strapped the scope over his head and twisted about. Nicholas, who had stayed upright at the helm, his seat and straps ignored, laughed. Ellie remained still, thick leather straps still buckled and preventing her from drifting out of her seat. Her crew knew what they were about and did not need her for such a mundane task as a post-transition check. "Contact 2 leagues ahead." She looked at Hawks. "Is it the target?" Hawks floated next to his console, tethered by the thick tube that ran to the eye sockets of the oversized helm he wore. His hands flicked across the Sagan crystals embedded in the console before him. "It's an old Ibrium-class freighter," Hawks reported. "But she has some battle scars, and I'd be a pauper if I bet those weren't modified gun ports on her side." As Hawks spoke, the bridge quieted. Ellie turned to her first mate, Sid Ganny. "Ship status?" Sid listened a moment more to the tubes before answering. "All stations report battle ready. This them?" "It matches well enough," she said. "Tell the Scepters to get ready and bring us in." The bridge crew whooped in excitement. Nicholas spun the wheel and worked the levers that signaled the engineers for full speed. Hawks continued to look around as he jotted a rough chart of the aisle, and Sid called down the tubes to the 3 lightship pilots. "She's turning about," Hawks said. "She spotted us, Captain." Ellie leaned forward and squinted, looking out the broad forward viewport. Ahead, a massive isle floated in the twilight haze, and a dozen smaller rocks, the shoals, drifted around it like ducklings around their mother. About halfway between the Asgurt and the isle, the faint glow of the infused Sagan engines was all Ellie could make out of their target. "Send the usual offer to surrender," she said. "No use being coy about it. They'll know who we are." Hawks reached over to a separate crystal and tapped a quick pattern, creating flashes of light from the much larger crystal on the Asgurt's prow. He chuckled. "No response, as it were, but they've opened those gun ports. You owe me a drink, Sid." Sid jerked up. "What? Why?" "Because we bet about those gun ports and you lost." "Like the Frost side did." "No, I heard you," Nicholas said. "Clear as day. Ibrium-class Skyrakers don't have cannons, you said." Sid looked at Ellie, a silent plea for help written across his face, but she only shook her head and unlatched her seat straps. Sid was a good man, but he was also the easiest mark on world. With a payout on this contract, though, what was a drink one way or the other? "You have the bridge, Mr. Ganny," she said. "Deploy the Scepters with orders to disable and see what we can do about those gun ports while we're at it. Then get us close enough to board." "Aye, Captain." She drifted out of her seat, letting the ease of weightlessness carry her a few feet before stretching her legs and touching boots to deck. With an audible click, the load boots stuck to the broadhead nails and let her move about with a semblance of gravity. "And it better not be that rot gut swill you like," Hawks said as she left the bridge. "I want something to enjoy, not to clean Martin's engine." A short ladder opened to the corridor with the officers' staterooms. She stopped in her own long enough to grab her splint armor, helm, and saber, then stepped toward the hatch on the far side. She made it halfway before someone caught her. "Hey, Captain!" Ellie swallowed a grimace and turned to face Jera, her senior scepter pilot. "Shouldn't you be airborne?" "Syke is still fighting with the docking clamp on the Vitani." Jera was tall, and not just for a woman. Her muscular frame was accentuated by her tight flight suit and black hair pulled back into an elaborate braid, accentuating skin as pale as Ellie's was dark. It made for an intimidating look, of which Ellie knew Jera was quite aware. "You know, the clamp I've been telling you needs replaced for the last 3 months." "I'll get Martin to look at it after we've bagged this contract." "And he'll say the same thing as every other time you've had him look at it," Jera said. "It needs replaced." "Now really isn't the time, Jera." "Clamp's holding my wings. Seems like the perfect time." Somewhere outside, an explosion rocked the ship. Nothing too strong, and far from a hit. A sounding shot, then, to judge distance. It could be tricky when all there was between you and your target was open air. "Fine," Ellie said. "We'll save some from this contract to properly repair the clamp." "Replace the clamp. Don't push it." Jera smirked, but turned around, darting down a ladder that led to the hold and lightship hangar. As she disappeared, Ellie heard her yell out, "Kep says we're getting a new clamp, Syke. You can wreck that one." Ellie almost ran after Jera to make sure Syke didn't follow through. But no, she would have to trust that he knew it was still a long way home, too long to tie a scepter down to the deck. He wouldn't do needless damage to the clamp. Repair or replace, that clamp would cost good coin, and there was always a longer list of needs for the Asgard than there were ship's funds to cover them. No, this wasn't the time to get lost in numbers and worries. It was time to close a contract. With a deep breath, Ellie stepped out of the corridor and onto the ship's waist. Here, a tight grid of metal bands provided the right amount of grip for her load boots. 15 others, men and women, were already on the deck, swords at hips, crossbows in hand, and armor and helms donned. Of them, only one was holding onto the railing instead of a line as the ship bucked about. Dyrek was still getting his sky legs. He tried to walk like he was on world instead of using the strange, sliding shuffle load boots required. "Harv," Ellie said, "your squad is on reserve." Dyrek, who was in Harv's squad, sighed in relief. She had no intention of letting the boy fight today. First, he needed to observe, and lose his breakfast, but mostly observe. She joined the 3 men of the captain's guard. She disliked the term, but Garam, Peter, and Chadol all insisted on using it. And long as they continued to watch her back, she decided she would let them. The Asgard pitched to the side, and Dyrek yelped and clutched tighter to the railing. Ahead, she saw their target creeping closer. The hull and sails were painted a mottled purple and yellow. It would stick out like a sore thumb on world, but it was perfect for blending into the perpetual twilight skies of the Isles. The sails were still out. She planned on running. 4 shapes left glowing ribbons in circles and swirls around the other ship. 2 were the Asgard scepters, the Solda and the Urta. The other 2 must belong to the target. Where did they find room on an Ibrium for cannons and 2 light ships? The old ship was bulky, but Ibriums were chambered cargo holds. How much more of the ship was modified with surprises? "This isn't going to be a stroll in the park, people," Ellie said. "She may look like a bit of a ragtag joke, but she has cannons and scepters and who knows what else. Maybe even a mage. Be quick, but don't be sloppy." There was a grunt in reply, and she settled in for the worst part. Waiting. The ship was maneuvering to run, firing her cannons more to keep the Asgard from racing to close the distance than with any intent to harm her. Another path was due to open soon, and with the fight happening around the target, it would be possible for the enemy scepters to get back aboard in time to make the jump. The Asgard would not be so lucky, and it would be 2 hours, a full sounding, before the path reopened, giving their quarry more than enough time to escape. A rumble filled the air, and the Vitani streamed into view from under the Asgard. Like the other scepters, it was a lean, spear-like lightship big enough for its pilot, a thruster, a light cannon, and a few harpoons. Its sail wings swooped back, limiting agility but granting speed. Jera was late to the party and had no intention to let it stay that way a moment longer. Where the Sulda and Urta were busy dancing with the target's scepters, trying to gain the vantage of a clear shot while avoiding getting shot themselves, the Vitani screamed into combat uncontested and fired a shell into the main thruster array before the enemy knew what was going on. It was so perfect, Ellie had to wonder if the clamp had malfunctioned at all, or if Jera was just killing time. The shot didn't destroy the thrusters, but they dimmed and flickered, and the Asgurt was closing the distance. There would be no escaping. Yet the sails stayed out. Scepters and cannons, and they still pinned everything on fleeing. Maybe there were no more surprises after all. Cannons roared to life both on the Asgurt and the target, sounding shots exploding in the air between the ships, and in a few instances over her head. She corrected her earlier thoughts. This was the worst part. Waiting she could do in spades, but standing helpless while someone tried to blow holes in her ship, having to trust Sid and Nicholas and Hawks to keep the worst of it from making contact, that she would never get used to. Brace for impact! She clenched a fist around the hilt of her saber and moved to the gunwale while the other sailors hunkered down to grab small handholds worked into the deck between the bands of metal. A blast hit the side of the ship with a sickening crunch, and Ellie leaned over the edge to see the damage. Scorch marks, the scent of ammonia, and a few splintered boards that leaked red light, but nothing too bad. Still, repairing mage-wrought hulls was not cheap. Again, she pushed thoughts of payment and expenses away. That was important, but not now. Now, they needed to end this battle as soon as they could. The Ibrium, her sails still out, twisted around from the latest broadside and kept pushing toward where the next path would open. Its scepters, though outnumbered, were swirling around in an erratic enough pattern that none of the Asgurt's pilots could get a clean shot to finish disabling the thrusters. The Urta spent a well-aimed harpoon to disable one of the sails, but it wouldn't be enough to stop them from making the jump. "We have one chance at this," Ellie shouted over the sound of another impact. "Bor, ready to cross!" Bor, a squat toad of a man, nodded and signaled to his squad before picking up a length of line and securing it to the railing. As though on cue, Nicholas rolled the ship. A burst of speed and a sharp turn, and the Asgurt twisted, bringing her cannons out of line, but also taking her out of harm's way. To the port side, Ellie now looked down on the target. Now! Bor and his squad leapt onto the gunwale and kicked off, flying out into open sky toward the target. Their jump-turned-fall felt comical and slow, and she counted her heartbeats until they grabbed the Ibrium's topmast and secured the lines. She leapt onto the gunwale, attaching the tether from her belt onto one of the lines. Then she jumped into the sky, and the rest of her combat squads followed. Behind her, she heard the telltale sound of Dyrek throwing up. And that's the beginning of Conflict Born, Book 1 of Endless Skies. Available March 24th in paperback, hardcover, and ebook. Go to richardfife.com for more information on how to order and to sign up for my newsletter. Also, through March 10th, pre-orders are open at the link in the description for signed hardcovers. These can be picked up at JordanCon, April 22nd to 24th in Atlanta, Georgia, or will be mailed after the convention. Sorry, but this is limited to the US only. Also, these pre-sales count towards my contest with Sarah Sover, where the winner has to buy the loser a nice bottle of liquor. So do me a solid and pre-order. Thanks for watching, like, subscribe, and all that, and be well.
But then the behemoth came, sealing the path before it took aim. By conflict born, ne'er be the same. We'll take our leave and fly.